Still the county. More taxes than rather than like if it was in Epsom County, they still push Epsom County further back.
Come on, Doug.
Yeah.
That's true. It's the same way it started.
Sorry.
Robin like Jesse James back there. They be doing it legally.
5 and 10 are like around the same time now.
You know what I'm talking
Last
about?
year the 5 went first and then the 10 went
It was at this one.
See, I went to Nashville with the girls.
You're back.
We started last couple of years.
Coming back this
in
morning.
hotel, but I just raised money
I gotta leave out
in the hotel.
Wednesday morning.
And they're afraid that I'll just
Where you going?
I'm going to Bowling Green, Richmond. I go wind up Bowling Green, Indiana.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if you're gonna pay everything on your own, you gotta do it.
Henderson, got family out there in Henderson. Pick up my 2 grandsons. They're out on Thanksgiving holiday all week.
You going with them? They gonna
And
come
then
down?
we'll go to Hopkinsville, pick up my daughter and granddaughter, one of the silver. Get my band, we're gonna hit the Bowling Green, pick up my brother, his wife, and hit that deal. He said, Wayne needs me. He said he's gonna sit in there, lay in there on my bed and watch my TV while he's gone. And wear my headset. Yeah, you got to with the TV, my headset, my headphones. Yeah, it works.
You drive safe. I'll let drive. You drive safe when I let drive.
I'm trying to. I'm gonna cut the back roads over to Henderson, Kentucky. Evansville. 69 still going up 65 all the way. 65.
It's quick on the back road.
Safer for me. Traffic on it was 65. It's gonna be
That's true.
I don't want to roll.
Down. Yes.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of traffic.
Marines.
Yeah.
I can do this, but I don't want to do it. You didn't realize it.
Well, come here, realize.
I calculated. They keep driving. Then look at my atlas and I just do one show. I've been all over it once. Back my students, I trained some students, they call me this guy.
All right, well, good morning. It's time for us to begin. I'd like to welcome everybody here. We're down to our last 2 weeks of the class. It seems like it's gone by pretty fast.
Record sheets.
But kind of where we're going from here, we're doing chapters 3 and 4 today out of 1 Kings. Wednesday night you'll do 5 through 8. And then next Sunday we'll do 9 through 11. That's as far as we'll go in 1 Kings. And then the Wednesday after that will be the last class. Gary will lead you in a review of 1 and 2 Samuel. Kind of just, you giving them a test, Gary? Yeah, okay. Be prepared for a pop quiz. So.
It's 100 questions.
All
Essay.
All essay, yes. As it should be. So that's where we have in the last 2 weeks where we're going to go. So Before we begin, though, let's Adam lead us in a word of prayer.
Father, you are God, you are the only God. We love you and we worship you. This hour we pray that you will open our hearts to accept your word. Help us to glean wisdom from it. Help us to grow our knowledge of you and your kingdom. Help us to be able to share your word to the world. Be courageous with it and willing and accepting of it. And remember that it is your precious word told to us, and that it is the gift of the world. Help us to remember the things that we learn this morning. We pray that we would carry as he speaks your word, that he speaks truths, and remember what he studied. Help us to remember who we are in your world, and I pray your will be done always. In Jesus' name.
Let me die.
Sorry, it sounds like Ryan's class is having more fun than we are. All right, we are in 1 Kings 3 and 4. So we'll start off with a little review from what you talked about on Wednesday night, and we'll get into chapter 3, where we get into the area about Solomon and his prayer for wisdom. And then chapter 4 talks a little bit more about his wisdom and some wealth, and a few of his officials that are mentioned here. And I listed here, we may talk briefly at the end here about some of Solomon's writings, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And then we have the Song of Solomon, which may or may not have been actually written by him. It could have been attributed to, dedicated to him, but it's definitely concerning the wisdom of Solomon, nonetheless. So let's talk about a little bit of review in the first two chapters that we talked about on Wednesday. If you remember, David is getting elderly. He's in his old age, and there was a young woman that was provided for him and for comfort, keep him warm. Abishag is her name, and then we see a problem with one of his other sons. What happens here with another son that very similar to Absalom?
While David was still living, he could claim himself king, and had some people on his Joab and the high priest was on his side.
That's right, yeah.
And, sacrificing and everything, had a big feast.
Yeah, Adonijah, another one of his sons, proclaims himself to be king. And what I always thought was interesting was that, he prepares for himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. This is in 1 Kings 1. Just like Adonijah had done. If you remember, Absalom had done the exact same thing. Just like, I guess that was the thing to do when you proclaim yourself as king. But he started doing the exact same thing. And he got some of David's men on his side, right? Like Donald said, Joab and Abiathar, who had been with David, had now come over to Adonijah's and kind of supported his camp. And so what do we see after that? What happens after that? Right, yeah. So we have Nathan and Bathsheba get together, right? And they decide to go to King, let him know that what's going on. Seems like King David, it's not the first time that he doesn't really know everything that's going on in his kingdom. And it seems like a lot's being hidden from him. A lot of it might be his old age now, and he's not able to keep up with everything that's going on. But there's a lot going on that he doesn't seem to know about. So that's where Bathsheba comes before him, and then Nathan corroborates her story. And then he does take action here to make sure that it's God's will that Solomon be become the king and not Adonijah. In verse 29-30, we see Solomon, your son, shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place. Even so will I do this day.
Yeah.
And that's what he had said to Bathsheba about that.
Okay.
And then he goes on to talk about proclaiming, and Adonijah finds out. How does Adonijah react when he finds out that David has proclaimed Solomon?
Runs to the temple and goes host for horns and altar.
Yeah, he's terrified, right? It says he's trembled and rose and
Rose. Yeah.
and then he's looking to save himself, and not only him but those that are with him.
Not going today.
We have Joab and the is on the run too here. We see here that also that David ends up dying, and we see where Solomon is establishing his reign. What is so where does Adonijah do after Solomon becomes king?
Still united.
Okay, and what does he want from the king? Right, so he wants her as a wife. And this has been David's, I don't know what you would call her, that she was a companion that they had arranged for him, and he doesn't have the nerve to ask him himself. He sends Bathsheba to go ask for him, and Solomon, how does he react? Yeah, and so what does he do about it?
As I'm executed.
Yeah, right away. Yeah. So he has Adonijah be put to death. There was no time. It wasn't 10 years on death row. It was immediate, right? It was in the verse 24, chapter 2. We see Adonijah shall be put to death today. So King Solomon said, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he struck him down and he died. Y'all talked about Benaiah on Wednesday night and some of the role. He'd kind of become the executioner for Solomon on a lot of these things. All right, and chapter 2 is kind of a long chapter. We also have this man Shimei, or Shimei. Who was he? Yeah, he was the man who cursed David, and he was protected, right? He was told he could live after that, but there were some restrictions. And what does he adhere to those restrictions? For a little while he does, but then he kind of gets complacent, right, and exits the area. He was restricted to a certain area, and he ended up exiting that. The king finds out. And as a result, he struck him down and he died also. So that leads us into chapter 3. Any comments or questions from chapters 1 and 2? Anybody? All right, let's go on into chapter 3. Chapter 3, somebody could start off by reading... just start reading with verse 1, and we'll read about the first 5 verses.
Now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to marry Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house, and the house of the Lord, and the wall all around Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the people sacrificed at the high places because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father, David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. Stop right here.
Yeah, you read one more.
And the king went to Gideon and sacrificed there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings in the altar.
Okay, so let's start off with the marriage.
Yes.
Why would he marry
Someone.
one of Pharaoh's daughters from Egypt?
Yes.
Okay. Remember, you studied history and not only scripture but secular history. You find out that was a normal thing for families of royalty to do. Is they would align themselves. You see that a lot in Europe. They'd align themselves with other leaders in other countries to have that blood relation and try to maintain peace and have an alliance against your enemies in that way. So this is part of that, and even says that it had been done for that reason. And we do see a description here about Solomon, how at this time, he loved God, and he walked as his father had in the statutes. And but then it says he had, except he had sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. Where does he go to sacrifice to the Lord? Gibeon. So what's going on at Gibeon? Why is he going to Gibeon?
That's where the tabernacle was.
Okay. Yeah, so where was the Ark of the Covenant, though, at this time? Oh, it used to be. Remember, it was finally brought back to Jerusalem, and David had formed a temporary tent for the ark. So we see some things aren't properly set up at this time, but so Solomon's going up to Gibeon because the tabernacle without the ark is up there, and we see that. He's making a sacrifice, and that's where God comes to him in a dream. And what goes on with this dream? Do you remember?
Yeah.
God asked him, "What shall I give you?"
Okay, so God, actually offers give him anything that he wants. And what does Solomon ask for? Wisdom. Okay. And he says, you have shown great steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and uprightness in heart toward you. And you have kept for him his great and steadfast love and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And we see that, and skipping down to verse 12, behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall rise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king will compare with you all your days. So we see God, because of his request not to ask for wealth or some earthly type things that we often might wish for. He didn't even ask for 100 more wishes, like people talk about. It's the first wish you always make, right? And God blesses him. He gives him that wise and discerning mind and heart, like he'd asked for. But he also gives him riches and honor. And he also says he'll lengthen his days. Though, what does he say he has to do to lengthen his days?
You walk in my ways and keep my statutes.
Right.
My
Yeah.
commandments.
Keep his statutes and commandments, and then he'll lengthen his days. So he's richly blessed here, based on his heart, his attitude, and what he asked of God. Yes.
I made a note on something. Going back a little bit, back to that verse 3. And what I was reading there was it seems like Solomon loved the Lord and he wanted to serve the Lord, but there was a big word there, and that word was accept.
Mm-hmm.
Except that he was making these he was making sacrifices. He was making sacrifices in the high places. So I don't know if we know if it meant that he was the one making the sacrifices, or if it was just the fact that they were doing it in the high place and not according to where it meant. But even here, he loved the Lord, but he wasn't doing what the Lord had commanded.
Yeah, things were still not quite right. And there were, and we've seen this all along, especially with the Ark of the Covenant, how things were done, not with God's authority. And this is part of it where we had the tabernacle here, we had the Ark over here, we have, David wanted to build the temple, and God wouldn't let him. So, but we all see it all starts coming together, right, for Wednesday night when you start talking about the temple being built, and now it can be done properly. But you're right, that is a big word.
I think also, thinking when we read ahead into Solomon's life and at the end of his life, and how his wives had led him to other gods and making sacrifices and those things. So perhaps it was here where he got used to doing things that were not his role and responsibility, but yet, it's okay. there's no harm, no foul. I'm gonna keep doing what I wanna do as opposed to what God's commanded me to do. And the lesson for us is exactly the same. God's given us patterns and ways He wants us to do things. And just because the world says it's okay to do it, that doesn't make it okay for us to do it.
Right, and that's the thing, when we do things in error, if we get used to it, then it can lead to, further error in the future.
We talk ourselves into the fact that it's wrong.
Yeah, right.
It's doing a good thing, so it's gotta be okay.
I love the Lord, it's gotta be okay.
Is the sin?
I was also thinking, because it's interesting in verse 4, he went to Gibeon to a great high place. So he was doing what he was supposed to be doing, but just adding a little extra.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wasn't he was doing it all the way he wanted. So that's another caution.
Turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 1. If you want to read more on this, you can go to 1st, 2nd Chronicles. And all this that we've been talking about with David and Solomon is written again in the Chronicles, and it enhances a little bit. 2 Chronicles chapter 1, I'll start with verse 1. It says, Solomon, the son of David, established himself in the kingdom, and the Lord his God was with him and made him exceedingly great. Solomon spoke to all Israel, to the commanders of the thousands and of hundreds, to the judges, and to all the leaders of all of Israel, and the heads of the fathers' houses. And Solomon and all the assembly went with him, went to the high place that was at Gibeon, for the tent of meeting of God, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, had made in the wilderness, was there. So this is the tabernacle, sometimes called the tent of meetings. But David had brought up the ark of God from Kiriath Jearim, that was the town, to the place that David had prepared for he had pitched a tent for it in Jerusalem. The son of Hur had made was there before the tabernacle. And so we're starting to see, and it happens, fairly quick in Solomon's life as his life goes on, how he's drawn to these high places. How many wives does he end up having? The spoiler alert here. 700. How many concubines?
Too many.
Yeah, 300. 700 and 300. So, you got 1,000. That, as a matter of fact, there's a whole complex. You'll see on Wednesday night. There's a whole complex built just for all of these women. No men were allowed in there except for Solomon.
So is it significant that he offered 1,000 burnt offerings? Just before God?
I don't know. That's Clay. Clay's the one that comes up with these conspiracies, right?
They can.
I think
Go
that's
ahead.
before you had all of it.
Never do.
Yeah, that's before, but
It's
no.
like, okay, is that a precursor?
I don't know.
I like it.
All right, then we get to an example of use of Solomon's wisdom in this chapter. You may want to kind of briefly tell the story. I think it's a popular story. Not only people of God know it, but I think it's also people in the world tend to know about this story a lot because it's become very famous. Who wants to describe what's going on here? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Solomon is still pretty recently, I feel like, come up into the throne. A part of his kingly duties is he's got to come in here, people. It's kind of like being a judge. I said, like in civil court, the two people came in saying, this person did that to me, no I didn't, and he's got to judge up and determine. A little bit like what Moses said. I said, when they came out of Egypt, but anyway. These two women came in and said they're both Mr. Harlots, and they both Mr. had children. One of them apparently rolled over on the child and smothered it to death. But rather than admitting she did that, she went to the other woman I said and switched. She gave her the dead child. I said and picked up the live baby and claimed I said that it was hers. So they're coming in here. There's no one else where they were living at the time, so no one can I said dispute. Call us as a witness. Again, that's important going all the way back to the Ten Commandments. That you cannot bear false witness. You got to tell the truth, and no one can be put. Because of course, murder is a sort of sin against them without the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. But there's not them to be had. So then Solomon, I really should have believed it was the Lord who gave him this idea, calls for a sword, which is what he's holding. I said, and he says, we're gonna take the live child, see them down there on the steps, and we'll, I said, just chop them in half. One to you and one to you. And we'll call it. But what he's actually doing is testing the woman. The one who was his real mother, she throws herself down and she pleads with him. I said, not to kill the child. She said, just go ahead. I said, and give it. I said to her.
Yeah, that right now.
But the other woman, I said, just stood there silently, made no response, but she knows that's not really.
Would you please?
And she actually says, he shall be neither mine nor yours, divide him. She actually says, go ahead and divide the child. So very good. We see the wisdom of Solomon, and he knows which one is the true mother, right?
Like our choose.
Yeah, so we see a good example, and the story becomes well known across all the land. In verse 28, we see it says Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king because they perceived that the wisdom of God was with him to do justice. So the story was for our benefit too, that we can see that we can make wise decisions. I don't know. In today's world, if you're going to threaten to cut a baby in half or not, but that may not be so wise. But we see it work for obviously for Solomon and his perception. Any other comments on that story? It's a good. I think it's a good story. It shows he was able to find out who the actual mother was.
What's that mother's name?
Right. She was willing to keep him alive, even if it was being raised by the lying prostitute, right? All right, let's go on into any questions or comments on chapter 3?
3.
Yes.
I want to go back to what God gave Solomon, and he gave him riches and honors, and that was a blessing until it wasn't. And it kind of became a trial for Solomon, because that's why we have the book of Ecclesiastes. He took all those riches, which were supposed to be a blessing, and maybe didn't use them in the right way.
And I think there's a modern term coined, the Solomon paradox, that you may have heard. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but Solomon's paradox is where he had all this wisdom, and he provided all this wisdom to all these different people, but over time he didn't adhere to all that wisdom, even though he had the wisdom. So no matter how wise we are, how strong we are, we can always be subject to fall, and we need to remember that. No matter how we're always susceptible to being submitting to temptation if we're not careful.
Yes.
All right, good. Let's go to chapter 4. We start off here in the chapter, a list of some high officials, and not much. I don't have a whole lot to say there. You can read it. There's some names that we've seen there before. Benaiah, who was at execution now, is the commander of the army. We see that Zadok and Abiathar are the priests, and a couple other people that we've seen before.
Quick question, even I couldn't find it. Zadok and Abiathar are the priests. Solomon had just removed Abiathar as the high priest, and so I was wondering, is this a different Abiathar, or does he still have some form of role?
I assume it's the same one. I don't know if they worked it out, but it could be a different, about the same name. I'm not sure. Anybody else know?
Maybe like Genesis is a little like Genesis talks about having you.
Yes.
But just to be a little timeline shift on just some of the revision, right?
Well, this is it becomes his officials, but this is beforehand is when we had under Adonijah, right? He had gone up with Adonijah, right? Yeah. So I don't know if they reconciled with him or, you know, just demoted him and kept him. I'm not real sure.
Sure.
If we can try to look into that a little bit more. He mentions in verse 7 about 12 officers over Israel that provided food for the king and his household. He would do one a month, and listed a whole lots of names. We're not going to read those unless you want to. And then in starting in verse 20, we see that it talks more about Solomon's wealth. And it's kind of hard to us to, I think, envision a lot of this wealth because it's not things that we think about. But when you see things like 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen, that's a lot of that's a lot of wealth. If you just think about it, we can't comprehend all that. It talks about all the flour and meal and oxen and cattle that he has and all this. That, remember, at a time like this, you know, food was, whoever had, you know, the control of the food had really control of the land. And it's an example of how wealthy he was. Verse 29, we see that it talks more about his wisdom. God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure and breadth of mind like the sand of the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the east and the wisdom of Egypt. This is what God had promised him, and it shows more that he continued. He spoke 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. Yeah, Mike?
No, go ahead.
And he speaks of the tree, in verse 33, he speaks of the trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. And it just goes on and talks about the things that he talked about. We'll talk about here in a few minutes about some of the proverbs and some of his writings that he did, because he used that wisdom and put it, you know, on paper to be able to be for our benefit also. We're going to see that in a few books. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, verse 21 and also in 24, it reaffirms that Israel, Solomon specifically, and also David, ruled over all of the area that God had promised. So once again, that confirms that they really did have control over all the land.
True, yeah. And we see something also in the verse 24 you're talking about where it says, and he had peace all sides around him. You know, David didn't really experience that peace. You know, he was always at battle, always fighting against the Philistines and others. But part of Solomon's blessing was having this peace around him for a while.
This is a question about verse 25. It mentions Judah and Israel. Is there any significance to him separating Judah and Israel at this time in history?
He's done it before in 1st and 2nd Samuel. We see that division that's mentioned. Yeah, I think it is kind of a precursor, to what's going to be happening very soon. It's constantly mentioned even prior to the division, and there's even a little bit of a hint of the division, I think, prior to this time too. But yeah, I think it's intentional. You know, just sometimes it brings out Judah as separate. I think it would be primarily Judah. Yeah.
And then the rest would be
Yeah. Now part of maybe it was half a tribe. It's been a while. Half a tribe of Judah was there with them.
Well, Jerusalem kind of like sits on the border between Judah and Benjamin, and so Benjamin kind of gets lumped in with Judah a lot of times.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen the divided kingdom, but
and the tribe of Simeon has been absorbed by Judah a long time.
yeah. It's
And just a thought, maybe it's Judah and Israel there because we know the lineage of Christ comes through Judah, but it's showing that Judah and Israel right now are in union,
right.
you know, at peace with one another.
And a lot of this was, this was all written, later on during the divided kingdom. So, when they go back and write it, that they're showing that Judah and Israel, just a natural inclination to separate the two in the writings. Any other comments or questions on chapter 4?
Comment on the amount of provisions needed for one day. And that one of his 12 men got a whole month. I mean, you had a month, you had to provide all of this for a whole month. So those leaders were exceptionally wealthy too. And I guess, but it just fell to 1 month a year to provide thousands of
Right.
hundreds and thousands of things. It's just kind of mind-blowing how
Well,
much.
you got 1,000 wives and concubines to feed, so.
I mean, and
They should.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been set up differently, but, you know, like, okay, so, you know, have the month of March, have to get all, you know, I wonder if you.
You had a year to prepare for that.
Yeah.
Unless you're the first guy, then
Yeah.
you heard it right. But yeah, it's a lot.
Instead of having 40,000 horses, though, it's one of the fertilizers used to grow crops.
Right.
Feed everybody.
There you go.
Thank you, Clay. All right, let's look at it. That's a fairly short. On Wednesday night, you're going to look at 5 through 8. It's quite a bit of reading, but it's all built around the temple. You're going to look at the building of the temple. You're going to look at the building of Solomon's house, which is interesting when you compare the two. But, so that's what we're going to talk about on Wednesday night. So I thought we would use this last 10 minutes to talk about some of Solomon's writings. Proverbs. What do we know about Proverbs? Any of you studied Proverbs in detail in the class? Usually, I think most of us have probably. There's a lot of Proverbs. When we were in Virginia, we studied the book of Proverbs. And we went through and read every single proverb over and over again. Imagine going through verse by verse. And I think it ended up being like a 2-year study on Proverbs. And a lot of them are repetitious and very similar. But we see there are a lot of good sayings in here. I kind of put here the breakdown of the Proverbs, the first 9 chapters. Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, and then the 10 through 22, the Proverbs of Solomon, 22:17 and through 24, sayings of the wise, 25 through 29, Proverbs that the officials of King Hezekiah copied, and then the last 2 chapters, you have the words of this King Agur, and then the chapter 31 talking about the ideal woman. We see a lot of these writings that talk about wisdom and folly and the conflict between the two and the differences between those. And I just thought I'd get a few of the verses here that just kind of exhibit some of the wisdom that Solomon had. You may have some of your favorites. If you want to bring those up, that's fine. Let's turn to Proverbs. I got them on the slide there, so you can either use the slide if you want to turn to it. Proverbs discipline. That's one that we often use. 3:5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding." 6:6 says, "Go to the ant, you slacker, observe its ways and become wise." Why does it say go to the ant? Remember?
Wise.
Yeah.
Prepares ahead of time.
Right.
For the winter.
They're always and they're very work. I think he compares. Is this where he compares it to the sloth? But be like the ant who's never stopping. Don't be lazy. 9:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." 13:24, "The one who will not use the rod hates his son, but the one who loves him disciplines him diligently." And 14:12 says, "There's a way that seems right to a person, but in the end is a way to death." That's only going through the first half of some of the popular ones in the first half of Proverbs. Anybody have any ones that they want to bring out they like that stand out?
In chapter 6, there's the one, man can't take fire into his bosom and not be burned. It's a good reminder of that. You know, there's a line not to cross, and you're just trying to see how close you can get.
Right.
Crossing it,
What's
you're
wrong
gonna
with
get
this?
burned. Stay away from it.
And chapter 6 also reminds me of the 7 things that the Lord hates. That I know I did a Zoom class, but I think it was my previous congregation did it with. At the very beginning of COVID, we did a Zoom class on these 7 things that were abomination to God. In verse 16, it was haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that makes haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. Those are the 7 things that's an abomination to God. Any others? Yes.
I like 19.
Pardon, 6.
All right, can you read it?
Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. We can make all the plans we want.
Right.
God's plan is trumping ours all the time.
Exactly. Yes. Right.
Oh, God.
16:2. All the ways of a man are clean in his own sight, but the Lord weighs the motives.
Okay.
You could be doing things that you have convinced yourself are right for the right reasons, but God actually knows
Good morning.
where you're going.
Right.
And that's a scary prospect.
Yes. So,
Yep. Good. Any others?
In that same chapter, 16:18, his pride goes before destruction,
yes.
haughty spirit before the fall.
Right.
Yeah.
See, that's a really good, excellent source of wisdom there. You know, we start putting pride above everything, thinking that, we're in control, we're doing the things, but, next thing we know, we're fall. We can fall
Yes, sir.
and be destructive.
Marbles. Dorming.
I've got all kinds of them highlighted. In verse 6, chapter 16, whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Talking about the importance of, if you can control your emotions, control your anger, how powerful you can be. It's
I've got one underlined, and I don't know why I would have underlined it, other than somebody probably talked about it, but it's kind of interesting to think about.
Okay.
It says, do not remove the ancient landmark which your fathers have set, and that landmark is found. And I'm just thinking about the way we think sometimes, and we think, oh, we can't do that was the olden days. We can't say this is a new time. You think that's what that means?
Good morning.
22, 28.
Morning.
Oh, yeah, 22, 28, I'm sorry, I didn't say it.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. Not what we really, I ever talk about, I don't know.
I think it seems like it could also go along with not passing the boundaries that that have been set, and not trying to go beyond. We talked about the term we use today is thinking outside the box. Well, you get yourself in trouble. You start thinking outside the box when it comes to God and the Word of God. Trying to do things that God hasn't really authorized. That's a good one to study and look at. Let's also, any others real quick before we go on?
I think it's interesting the way
Yes,
one section of scripture it talks about the adulterous woman and how the young man should stay away from her and why. But then he ends his writings with the worthy woman.
Right.
And this is the woman you should strive to be and the woman you should look for.
Yeah, so he points out both sides of it, and he uses the illustration of the wicked woman and foolishness, in this contrast. And it's a really good study if you can do Proverbs and look at that. And it also leads to that paradox we talked about, where later on he ends up getting snared by that same thing, right? Ecclesiastes, I just went through and broke down Starts off talking about all this vanity. There's a time for everything. Evil under that's not the S-O-N. That's supposed to be S-U-N. Fear God, vanity of wealth and honor, wisdom versus folly, and death comes to all. And then at the end, remember the Creator in your youth. Does anybody have any passages? I know there's a lot of good passages in Ecclesiastes and some sources of wisdom that are pointed out in here. In chapter 1, he talks about some of the vanity of wisdom. Verse 14 says, I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. And then verse 18, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. So what do you think we have going on here with him?
Beware of worshiping more and more knowledge. Beware.
Yeah.
It could lead you to down the wrong cheese.
Yeah, pursuit of knowledge in itself and could lead you down the wrong path and make you think. Just remember, God is in control and has all. And don't put, God doesn't. Our ways are not God's ways in our thoughts.
I think chapter 12, verse 13 and 14 says, it's the heart of everything. It says, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil.
Yeah, that kind of sums it all up, right? The whole book, and his whole. And I think it sums up perfect wisdom right there. The bottom line. If we were to have a bottom line, right? It would be kind of that one. Fear God and keep his commandments, a whole duty.
Solomon's realizing that he's about to go the way of his father. He's about to die. Everything that he had amassed and done, and all these things he had started, it's all going to be given to somebody else. Are they prepared? Do they have the wisdom to run the country and take care of these things, or are they going to squander it? And ultimately, those things don't really matter, though. And that's what he says in the end. The conclusion is fear God.
Right. Yep. See?
And then going on, and that should be on the front of thinking, but he also says in chapter 3, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is a gift from God. God is going to bless us when we put him first and enjoy it. He didn't put us here to suffer and all that. He wanted to give us this. He loves us.
Yep. And beginning of chapter 3 talks about there's a time for things. There's time to enjoy the things, but there's also time that may require suffering. And the first 8 verses he talks about all these things that are time to do, time to keep silence, time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. All these things are mentioned. Time for everything.
Gary, I like 6 verse 9. It sounds like a proverb.
Useful.
Better is the sight of the eyes than the wondering of desire. It's way more important what's right in front of you and what you actually have than wasting so much time focusing on what you wish you had, what you're desiring. We spend so much time dreaming about things we wish we had that we forget about those things that are right in front of us that we can use today.
Right.
Just not being content.
Yeah, good one. Very good.
I like 9 verse 12. Look, I was telling Solomon the son that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, no riches to men of understanding, no favor to men of skill. Time and chance happen to them all.
That's right, yeah. Last thing real quick, Song of Solomon, we didn't talk about that, but that's a love story between love poems between a man and a woman. And you can read that on your own. So Wednesday night, read 1 Kings 5 through 8 and be prepared to talk about the building of the temple, building of Solomon's house. and some lessons that we can learn from
Dad.
his choices on that. All right, thanks
I'm
for your
hungry, Dad.
participation. Appreciate it. Oh, okay. You want to you?
What church was? Church was?
What do you want a picture of?
We're studying Our Lady's Cousin Tuesday morning.
Okay. I kind of consolidated a little bit. I think it was a little bit. So there's other, maybe some more subdivision, but that's just in general. Yeah. Sure.
You have responsibilities.